The story of Point Pleasant is not merely a chronicle of a monster, but a documentation of a haunting that permeated the very soil of West Virginia long before the tragedy struck. Before the collapse of the Silver Bridge claimed 46 lives and shattered the heart of a community, the atmosphere in this small industrial town had shifted into something palpable and oppressive. It is essential to understand that the events transpiring between November 1966 and December 1967 were not isolated incidents of mass hysteria, but a structured sequence of supernatural phenomena documented by journalists like John Keel and local law enforcement. The entity that would come to be known as the Mothman was simply the harbinger, a grotesque apex to a pyramid of high strangeness that included unidentified aerial phenomena, poltergeist activity, and precognitive nightmares experienced by the residents. Hello, and welcome to NightLine Podcast. I am Night, your host and guide through the archives of the Unexplained. Today we delve into one of the most credible and terrifying accounts in American paranormal history, a case where folklore collided violently with reality. To understand the arrival of the creature, one must first understand the stage upon which it appeared. Point Pleasant in the mid-1960s was a quintessential American town, fueled by industry and bound by the tight-knit social fabric of the Ohio River Valley. It was a place where families prioritized their mortgage stability and relied on the predictable rhythms of coal and chemical manufacturing. However, just outside the town limits lay a scar on the landscape known as the TNT area, officially the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. During World War II, this location served as a manufacturing site for explosives, a hazardous environment where toxic chemicals seeped into the ground and where massive concrete igloos were constructed to store volatile munitions. By 1966, the dense forest had reclaimed the space, shrouding the decaying concrete bunkers in thick undergrowth and perpetual shadow. It was a place locals avoided at night, a location that felt fundamentally wrong, as if the land itself held a grudge. Historical records and local lore suggest that this region was cursed by Chief Cornstalk, a Shawnee leader betrayed and murdered in the area centuries prior, and many believe the Mothman was the physical manifestation of this ancient malediction, or perhaps an interdimensional traveler drawn to the negative energy of the site. The legend of the Mothman is inextricably linked to the Silver Bridge, an I-bar chain suspension bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio. Built in 1928, it was a marvel of engineering for its time. Yet by 1967, it carried traffic loads far exceeding its original design specifications. While later investigations by federal authorities would cite stress corrosion cracking and a failure in the suspension chain as the cause of the collapse, those who lived through the 13 months of terror preceding the disaster recount a different narrative. They speak of a looming sense of dread, a feeling that the town was being watched by a presence that defied biological classification. This was not simply an animal. Reports consistently described a bipedal humanoid standing 7 feet tall, possessing a wingspan of 10 feet, and, most terrifyingly, glowing red eyes set into its chest or shoulders that seemed to project a hypnotic, paralyzing fear. The entity did not behave like a bird or a bat, but displayed intelligence and a deliberate intent to be seen, acting as a grim sentinel observing the impending doom. The connection between the creature's appearances and the subsequent tragedy has led many researchers to categorize the Mothman not as a cryptid, but as a paranormal omen, a visual warning system that humanity failed to interpret until it was too late to prevent the catastrophe that required extensive services from every local attorney and insurance adjuster in the aftermath. The pivotal moment that catapulted the Mothman from local rumor to national nightmare occurred on the cold night of November 15, 1966. This event, documented in police reports and detailed extensively in John Keel's seminal work, The Mothman Prophecies, involved two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallette. They were driving through the desolate stretches of the TNT area, a common pastime for local youth seeking privacy or thrills. As their 1957 Chevrolet navigated the winding gravel roads near the old North Power Plant, the headlights swept across a figure standing by the roadside. It was not a man, nor was it any fauna known to zoology. The witnesses described a massive grayish figure, with the distinct shape of a man but larger, shuffling on legs that seemed human, yet ended in uncertain appendages. But it was the eyes that seared themselves into the witnesses' memories, two large circular points of red luminescence that glowed with an internal energy, completely devoid of the reflection seen in animal eyes. Panic was immediate and primal. As the driver accelerated the vehicle away from the creature, the entity did not flee into the woods as a bear or deer would. Instead, it displayed a terrifying capability that defied the laws of aerodynamics applicable to a creature of its size. The couples reported that the creature spread massive wings that unfolded from its back like a great cape and launched itself into the air. As they sped down Route 62, reaching speeds of over 100 miles per hour, a reckless pace that risked a severe auto accident, the creature kept pace with them effortlessly. It did not flap its wings furiously, but glided with supernatural ease just above the roof of the car, emitting a high-pitched screeching sound that some compared to a large fan or a distorted mechanical signal. This pursuit was not merely an animal chasing prey. It was a deliberate act of intimidation. The witnesses felt a psychic weight, a sense of malevolence that transcended the physical danger of the chase. The creature seemed to be testing them, pushing them to the brink of their sanity as they raced toward the safety of the town limits. Upon reaching the Mason County Courthouse, the terrified couples rushed inside to find Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead. Halstead, a seasoned lawman, known for his stoicism and experience, later went on record stating that he had never seen people this terrified. He noted that their fear was genuine, physical, and undeniable. These were not pranksters spinning a tall tale, but traumatized individuals who had encountered something that shattered their understanding of reality. The deputy followed them back to the TNT area that very night, but the creature had vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of unease and strange static interference on the police radio. This incident marked the beginning of a siege upon the town. The description given by the Scarberries and Mallettes became the archetype for all future sightings. The gray skin, the vertical takeoff, the hypnotic red eyes, and the overwhelming sense of doom. It was an encounter that suggested the entity was not of this earth, possessing abilities that hinted at a paranormal or interdimensional origin rather than a biological mutation.
In the days following the initial report, the floodgates opened, transforming Point Pleasant into a chaotic hub of paranormal activity and media frenzy. The story was picked up by the local press, and soon the bird, as it was colloquially called, became the primary focus of the community. However, the phenomena were not limited to sightings of the winged creature. A complex web of high strangeness began to envelop the region, suggesting that the Mothman was merely the most visible component of a larger, more sinister intrusion. Another credible witness, Newell Partridge, a local contractor, reported a bizarre incident that actually preceded the TNT area sighting by roughly an hour. Partridge was at home when his television began to emit a strange whining sound and display complex geometric patterns, a disruption that no standard electronics repair service could explain at the time. His German shepherd, a fierce guard dog named Bandit, sensed something outside and rushed into the darkness to investigate. Partridge shone a flashlight toward the barn and saw two red circles resembling bicycle reflectors, but they were moving. Bandit charged toward the eyes, ignoring his master's calls, and was never seen again. The loss of the animal was not just a disappearance, it was an erasure, adding a menacing predatory aspect to the entity. As weeks turned into months, the sightings accumulated into the hundreds, defying the skepticism of local authorities and outside experts. Firemen, churchgoers, and reputable citizens came forward with consistent accounts. The entity was seen perched on roofs, standing in the middle of roadways, and circling the TNT area's igloos. It demonstrated a peculiar interest in the technology and infrastructure of the human world, often being sighted near high-voltage power lines and industrial plants. During this period, the phenomenon expanded to include poltergeist activity in the homes of witnesses, strange knocks, moved objects, and phantom voices. John Keel, who arrived in Point Pleasant to investigate, documented these occurrences, noting that the witnesses often suffered from conjunctivitis and sunburn-like symptoms after close encounters, suggesting the creature emitted some form of actinic radiation. This detail moves the narrative away from simple cryptozoology and toward the realm of ufology and advanced physics, implying the creature was energetic in nature. The psychological toll on the town was immense. Residents lived in a state of heightened anxiety, securing their homes with upgraded security systems and keeping firearms close at hand. The atmosphere was thick with paranoia, exacerbated by the arrival of mysterious strangers who did not fit the profile of reporters or tourists. These individuals, often described as wearing ill-fitting black suits and driving pristine, out-of-place vehicles, began harassing witnesses, warning them into silence. They possessed strange mannerisms and seemed unfamiliar with basic human customs, further reinforcing the theory that Point Pleasant had become a focal point for a convergence of realities. The Mothman was the centerpiece, the dark angel hovering over the town, but the entire fabric of the community was being tested by forces that operated beyond the veil of human perception. The entity was not just a monster. It was a symptom of a reality breaking down, a cosmic stress test centered on the quiet banks of the Ohio River, counting down the days to a disaster that would require more than just faith to endure. The sightings were not random. They were a prelude, a gathering of dark energy waiting for the inevitable snap of steel and the scream of twisting metal.
The narrative of the Mothman moves inevitably toward its catastrophic conclusion on December 15, 1967. The atmosphere in Point Pleasant had shifted from curiosity to a heavy, suffocating dread that hung over the Ohio River Valley like the thick fog common to the region. It was the height of the Christmas shopping season, and the town was bustling with activity as residents made their final preparations for the holiday. The air was bitterly cold, and the traffic on the Silver Bridge was unusually dense, creating a physical strain on the structure that had stood since 1928. While the engineering reports filed later would discuss stress corrosion cracking and the failure of a single eye-bar in the suspension chain, the spiritual perspective suggests a convergence of negative energies that had been accumulating for 13 months. The bridge, a primary artery connecting West Virginia to Ohio, was packed bumper to bumper with vehicles carrying families, workers returning home, and trucking transport carrying heavy loads. The scene was mundane, yet the underlying tension was palpable to those sensitive to the shift in the environment. At approximately 5 p.m., the structural integrity of the bridge failed. Witnesses who survived the event described a sound that defied mechanical explanation. A gunshot-like crack, followed by a wrenching, grinding noise of twisting steel that echoed across the valley. In a matter of seconds, the massive suspension bridge folded like a house of cards. Vehicles that were suspended over the dark, freezing waters of the Ohio River were plunged downward as the roadway disintegrated beneath them. The horror was absolute. There was no time for emergency braking or evasive maneuvers. Gravity claimed everything. The silence that followed the initial crash was quickly broken by the screams of survivors clinging to debris and the frantic splashing of those trapped inside sinking automobiles. The cold water acted as an immediate anesthetic to hope, making rescue efforts incredibly difficult for the first responders who arrived on the scene. The collapse was not just a structural failure. It was a mass casualty event that would require extensive disaster management protocols and legal intervention in the years to follow. It is significant to note that in the immediate moments of the collapse, the Mothman was not seen. The entity, which had been a constant, terrifying presence for over a year, had vanished. This absence speaks volumes about its nature. It was not the cause of the disaster, but the witness to it, a herald that had completed its grim assignment. The sightings, which had plagued the town and occupied the resources of local law enforcement and journalism, ceased entirely the moment the bridge fell. The connection was undeniable. The creature had arrived to mark the location of a tragedy, drawing attention to the specific geographic point where death would harvest 46 souls. The correlation between the cessation of the paranormal activity and the physical tragedy suggests a synchronicity that defies statistical probability, leading researchers to conclude that the entity operated outside of linear time, perceiving the future collapse as an event that had already occurred in the timeline of the supernatural. The days and weeks following the collapse were defined by grief and a grim recovery operation. Divers braved the murky, freezing currents to recover bodies trapped in the submerged wreckage, a task that traumatized even the most hardened professionals. The town of Point Pleasant was transformed into a site of mourning, with funeral services becoming a daily occurrence. The psychological impact on the community was profound, necessitating a form of collective grief counseling that was largely unavailable in that era. Amidst the sorrow, the strange figures known as the Men in Black, who had harassed witnesses and confiscated evidence throughout the year, also disappeared. Their departure reinforced the theory that the entire Mothman episode was a contained event, a specific intersection of high strangeness designed to center around the Silver Bridge disaster. The investigation into the collapse led to lengthy litigation, with wrongful death lawsuits and insurance claims dominating the local courts. But no legal verdict could explain the 13 months of terror that preceded the fall. The legacy of the event left a permanent scar on the psyche of the region. The people of Point Pleasant had to reconcile the loss of their loved ones with the undeniable reality that they had been warned. The red eyes of the Mothman were retrospectively interpreted not as the gaze of a predator, but as the signal lights of a cosmic alarm system that humanity was too primitive to understand. The entity did not communicate in words, but in presence and fear, using the primal language of dread to alert the population to the instability of their reality. The tragedy forced a re-evaluation of the nature of the creature. It was no longer viewed merely as a biological cryptid, but as a manifestation of impending doom, similar to the banshee of Celtic lore or the grim reapers of various mythologies. The failure to heed the warning resulted in a loss of life that might have been preventable had the paranormal signs been interpreted as a call to evacuate rather than a curiosity to be hunted.
Analyzing the Mothman phenomenon through a deeper spiritual lens reveals that this entity was likely not a beast of flesh and blood, but a being from a different plane of existence, perhaps what Eastern traditions might classify as an asura or a vimana peta. These are powerful beings that exist in a state of suffering or wrath, often possessing supernatural abilities and the capacity to interact with the human realm during times of low karmic vibration. The Mothman was not a bodhisattva or an enlightened being, for it brought fear rather than peace and confusion rather than clarity. It was a watcher, a being attracted to the energy of impending death, much like a vulture circles a dying animal. It possessed the abhina, or supernatural knowledge to foresee the future, specifically the moment of death, but it lacked the compassion or the permission to intervene directly. It stood as a testament to the fact that the universe is teeming with intelligent life forms that operate just beyond the spectrum of visible light, observing human destiny with cold detachment. Regarding the 46 souls who perished in the freezing waters, their sudden and violent deaths suggest a transition that was confusing and traumatic. In spiritual terms, dying with sudden fear often leads the consciousness to a state of limbo, or the intermediate state known as the bardo. It is highly probable that many of these spirits remained bound to the location for a time, confused by the sudden severance from their physical bodies. They did not likely ascend immediately to the higher heavens or deva realms, but rather required the dedication of merit from the living to help them navigate their journey toward a favorable rebirth. The tragedy serves as a potent reminder of the impermanence of life, known as anicca. Death does not wait for us to be ready. It can arrive amidst the mundane act of driving home for the holidays. The Mothman serves as a dark teacher, reminding us that the veil between life and death is paper-thin, and that our technological achievements, like the Silver Bridge, are fragile constructs that can fail at any moment. Therefore, the ultimate lesson of Point Pleasant is one of mindfulness and preparedness. We must live our lives with the understanding that the present moment is the only certainty we possess. Do not wait to make peace with your loved ones or to purify your own mind, for the red eyes of fate are always watching from the shadows, and we never know when the bridge beneath us might give way. If you, the listener, have ever experienced a premonition, a warning sign, or an encounter with the unexplained that you felt was a message, I invite you to document it in the comments below. Your experience adds to the collective understanding of these mysteries. I wish you all safety, awareness, and the protection of positive energy. Please subscribe to NightLine Podcast and ring the notification bell to ensure you never miss an investigation into the unknown. If there are any errors in this recounting, I ask for your forgiveness. Let me know what story you wish to hear next, and I will search the archives of the impossible to bring it to you.